Hello there, my name is Ben Almeida, and this is my pitch deck for the limited animated series Atler Circus. After running away from home, a young trans boy is adopted into a traveling circus where he learns more about his queer identity and begins to uncover the secret behind the circus's most famous act. The protagonist of our series is a young boy named Hugo Halstead. He uses he/him pronouns and is 12 years old. He is transgender and of Irish Catholic descent. He comes from an upper-class family, is short, scrawny, and often wears baggy, ill-fitting clothing since that's the only type of masculine clothing he can find. He's very headstrong and willing to stick his neck out for others, but is trying to learn how to love himself in the process of finding love for these new people in his life. Hugo doesn't really have the language to state that he is transgender, but he knows that he's a boy and not a girl, which he tries to express to his family, but is often simply ignored. This is part of why he gets along so well with the circus, because they don't question his identity at all, they just go along with it. He is mentored and taken in by Clarice Guggenheim. She's a young lesbian woman, about 19 years old, of Jewish heritage, who was orphaned at a young age and ended up joining the circus because of that. She's long red hair that's very curly. She's quite willowy, built like a ballerina, about 5'7", and is excited to take on a mentorship role for Hugo because she takes a liking to him right away. She is also dating one of the stagehands named Bernice or Bernie Wallace. Bernie is 19 years old and also a lesbian. She is African American, born and raised lower class, primarily within the circus, and is built tall and sturdy with short, natural hair. She's very quiet and reserved, similar to Hugo, but is also very loyal to Clarice and everyone else in the circus who has treated her and her family well. Dr. Ophelia von Wolf is a German doctor and mad scientist. She is about 52 years of age and uses she/her pronouns, and is a transgender woman as well. She came from an upper-middle-class background with a fairly successful career as a doctor until she was outed as being trans and lost her job. She then joined the circus as their physician and started doing experiments in secret, trying to figure out how to revive the circus animals that passed away during their acts. She's doing this in order to try and save the circus money in the long run. The story begins at the Halstead mansion. Mr. Floyd Halstead and Miss Evelyn Halstead have 7 children, aged 6 months to 14 years. After the family and house are briefly shown in the opening, we see the children gathered in the foyer with their mother, preparing to head to the circus that is in town. Our main character, 12-year-old Hugo, is standing meekly in the back of the group. He is dressed in oversized boy clothes with his long hair crudely tucked up into a flat cap. As the family heads outside, Hugo is stopped by his mom. His mother and the rest of the family only refer to him with she/her pronouns and by his birth name, Winifred or Winnie. Mrs. Halstead begrudgingly allows Hugo to leave the house, but not before snatching the cap off his head, so his long hair is exposed. The family drives together through the small town that they live near and pull into a makeshift parking lot that is adjacent to a large empty field. In this field is set up a massive circus tent surrounded by huge billowing banners advertising various circus acts. The young children all burst from the car, eager to enter the large tent. Hugo is stopped from following them by the family butler. The butler takes off his flat cap and hands it to the smaller Hugo. The young boy smiles and accepts it, eagerly tucking his hair away again before following his siblings into the tent. The lights in the tent dim, and a spotlight is shown in the entrance of the back of the tent. After a drumroll, the entrance is thrown open, and the ringmaster, Riz, steps out. He holds a megaphone and struts to the center of the ring to announce the first act. We are shown a few short pieces of various acts involving clowns, lions and tigers, and dogs doing stunts before the ringmaster announces a brand new act. A young man and woman, introduced as Charlie and Clarice, enter the ring and climb up the ladders set up on either side of the ring. Once they reach the platforms holding the trapeze, they jump off and begin to flip and twirl in the air, flying back and forth. Once they finally land, the duo is met with thunderous applause as they take a bow and exit. The ringmaster then begins to announce the next act, but Hugo turns to the butler and tells him he's going to the bathroom before slipping out the entrance of the tent quietly. He catches sight of the trapeze duo stretching, and just as he is about to head over to talk to them, he is lifted by the collar by a tall woman, Bernie. He struggles to get free as she asks him what he's doing back here, drawing the attention of the trapeze artist Clarice. She approaches, and he finally admits that he loved her act, and he just wants to learn how to join the circus as well. After he is set back down, she tells him that he'll be able to join the circus one day as long as he sets his heart to it. She is then called away to get ready for the closing act, and the strong woman ushers Hugo back to the front entrance of the tent to join his family for the rest of the show. On the car ride back home, Hugo hands the butler his hat and thanks him for letting him borrow it for the night. Hugo is put to bed with his siblings once they get home, but he is much too worked up over the circus show to fall asleep. He gets up and heads downstairs toward the kitchen, where he overhears his mother chewing out the butler for letting her, quote, daughter wear his hat. Mrs. Halstead ends up firing the butler on the spot. Hugo scurries up to the man and tugs lightly on his sleeve. The tall butler kneels to his level and puts his flat cap on the child's head before telling him he should never stop being who he is. Hugo, furious with his mother, decides he's had enough and manages to sneak out the back door of the house unnoticed. The young boy then makes the long trek through town and arrives back at Atler's Circus. Hugo quietly manages to slip into one of the covered wagons that were left on the outskirts of the encampment. He settles into his hiding spot and slowly drifts off to sleep, ending the first episode. Some notes on later episodes are that after running away from home, Hugo's parents send out a private investigator to find him, and the private investigator ends up being accidentally killed by one of the circus performers after he becomes hostile with the group, and is later revived by Ophelia using the method that allows her to revive circus animals. The latter half of the series includes them trying to figure out what to do with this PI, while also trying to make sure that Hugo doesn't get caught and return to his parents. Hugo's character is actually based on myself and the intense emotions I had as a young teenager while coming out as transgender. I feel that Hugo will be a relatable character for many young transgender people who also had to jump through countless hurdles to find their identity and finally love their true selves. The story will be animated completely in stop motion, similar to the works of Tim Burton and Henry Selick. The intended format for this is a limited series of around 10 episodes, each around half an hour in length, and I wanted it to be released on a streaming platform once weekly until the series is completed. In terms of tone, the show is meant to present a mysterious and dark atmosphere mixed with a comedic and lighthearted storyline involving a found family trope. This piece utilizes dark aesthetics and themes while having lighthearted dialogue and a story revolving around the LGBT community, as well as a jovial animated style, which makes it an animated, dark, queer comedy. This story is set in the 1920s, so it plays out in a pre-COVID area, and that does not affect the story in any way. In the beginning of the story, as we follow Hugo and his family, this section will be very monochromatic, using primarily grays, blacks, white, or neutral earth tones such as beige and brown. Hugo's family is meant to replicate what the 1920s looks like through the pictures we have from that area. Once Hugo enters the circus, he is introduced to a world of color and bright lights. This stark contrast in color design is not only meant to show the difference between the circus and the outside world, but also to represent how, due to discrimination, the queer community in the 1920s is barely documented. In our modern day, we have to come up with our own images of what their lives were like, which allows for a more colorful and bright view of that time. Any major camera movement will be very purposeful and typically be used to establish setting. There will be lots of wide-angle shots when introducing characters to showcase the movement of the characters, since that helps to establish their personalities, especially within animation. Each circus performer moves in a different way based on their specialties and personalities. A perfect example of this movement being used within stop motion comes from the opening of Nightmare Before Christmas when Jack Skellington is first introduced.
Halloween, 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 Halloween. In this town we call home, everyone hail to the pumpkin song.
Within the circus, outside of performances, the lighting is typically one or two bright sources of light, such as a window or lamp, to replicate the spotlights used in performance, but on a smaller scale. And during performances, the lighting is very bright. There are multiple spotlights and bright lights surrounding the main characters in the ring to really light them up. Outside of the circus, lighting is very dim. Outside of natural lighting, the only lights inside buildings are often soft, coming from dim lamps or fires. For music in this story, it will be a mixture of more modern songs and music from the 1920s. The more period-accurate music will be featured in scenes outside of the circus and around the Halstead family, and the more modern music will be a mixture of upbeat songs and songs revolving around sexuality/gender, depending on the mood of the scene. Some artists whose work I've been looking to include are Mika.
Everybody's gonna love today, gonna love today, gonna love today. Everybody's gonna love today, gonna love.
Jody Clark.
To be so mean, I'm guessing that I've grown horns. I guess I'm human no more. I can tell I've rotted in your brain.
Fleetwood Mac.
Now here you go again, you say you want your freedom.
And many others. This work includes some mild violence as well as homophobia, transphobia, and racism towards characters. It is targeted towards people 13 and up who are more capable of understanding the nuance around these topics and who won't be too disturbed by that content.